The Thunder exceeded a lot of people's expectations this year, snagging the #1 seed in the Western Conference, but now they're staring down the barrel of the offseason, and they actually have a lot of questions to answer about who they're going to move forward with, who they're going to try and move, and what free agents, if any, they should try and go after. So we're going to get into all of that and more. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, but a little bit more about them later. To get an idea of what the Thunder are going to be working with heading into this offseason and 2, 3, 4 years down the line, we're going to take a look at their salary cap situation. They've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on that long-term contract through 2027, so they're good in regards to him. But Chet and Jalen Williams are going to be due for their rookie max contract extensions at some point, so that's going to be a bridge that OKC is going to have to cross. But right now, I would say it's more about looking at the role players that they currently have and making sure they can keep some of those really important guys while also leaving themselves enough flexibility to handle those contract extensions when they come up. Keep in mind, OKC could be working with up to $35 million in open cap space, depending on whose rights they decide to renounce, which player options they decide to accept, and some of the dead cap that they have coming off the books soon. Two really important guys that I'm kind of keeping an eye on as the Thunder head into this offseason is Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins. Now, if you're a Thunder fan, you obviously understand the importance of Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins. You know that Isaiah Joe is one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA. You know that Aaron Wiggins is one of the best role players in the NBA. And so I think it's pretty obvious that OKC is going to do everything in their power to keep those two guys around long term. Well, they both have team options for next year. There's a few different ways that OKC could decide to go about handling these team options. One, they could just accept both of their team options. Those guys are on the roster through next year, and then next offseason, they would become unrestricted free agents. The other alternative is OKC declines those team options. Those guys become free agents, but OKC signs them to a contract extension or re-signs them to a more long-term lucrative deal that makes everybody happy. And I guess the third option would be OKC declines those team options and both of those guys just become free agents and leave OKC. Like I said, I don't really see that happening. Both of these guys are really important to OKC's success, so I think they're both going to be sticking around long term. Both of those guys are still pretty young and they're not at the forefront of top free agent discussions. That might not be the case down the road, so OKC needs to do whatever they can to keep them around long term. Now, even though Gordon Hayward didn't actually do a whole lot on the court for OKC this season, it's important to note that his contract is going to be coming off the books, and that's what's going to clear up a ton of cap space for OKC. That's going to facilitate the front office's ability to keep some of these role players around. It's just going to be a matter of who and for how much. Now, there is, of course, an elephant in the room, and that elephant is Josh Giddey. Now, I know there's a lot of people who think that Josh Giddey still has plenty to show. He's not done getting better. All of that may or may not be true. I'm not going to weigh in on that. What I will say is I think it's probably time for OKC to move on. I think a lot of Thunder fans agree with that. I think in the postseason, it became pretty clear that opposing teams were able to just build their defensive scheme around the fact that he doesn't shoot, he doesn't really score, he's not entirely capable of putting the ball on the floor. So when opposing defenses were having to figure out, okay, who are we going to help off of? Well, the clear answer was Josh Giddey. He doesn't do a whole lot on the other end of the floor either to really counteract the fact that his offense just simply isn't where it needs to be. So I think it's probably in the best interest of all parties to move on. But the big question is, how much is Josh Giddey worth on the market? Does he command a first-round pick? A couple of second-round picks? What kind of player are you getting in return for Josh Giddey? And I don't have a clear answer for that. Reports have already come out that OKC is shopping him around the league to kind of see what the market value is for him. But there's obviously the fact that he's really struggled throughout his career so far in a lot of areas. There's the off-court stuff. So I just don't really know exactly what his value is at this point. It's really tough to say. But ultimately, the thing to keep in mind with the Thunder potentially moving Josh Giddey is that they have enough talent already on the team that they don't need to bring somebody else in to replace Josh Giddey. They have players who will replace Josh Giddey in the rotation. It's just simply a matter of clearing up the playing time and the minutes and the shots by sending him out and potentially getting just draft capital in return or cheap contracts that will end up off the books anyways. Real quick, guys, I want to take a second to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform for creators to set themselves apart from the crowd online. Whether you're trying to share your work with more people or grow a brand, Squarespace makes it super simple to create an awesome website where you can engage with your audience and reach more people. I have absolutely zero web design experience, but Squarespace's simple and easy to use user interface takes out all of the frustration of building a website and turns it into an easy and fun process. You can make a completely personalized website with their guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint. You can choose from professionally curated layout and styling options to build a unique website from the ground up, and they make it super easy to manage your search engine optimization so that you can find your audience and they can find you. Make checkout effortless for your customers with simple but powerful payment tools. Accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, and in select countries, give your customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. If you've always wanted to make a website but you just don't know where to start, then Squarespace should be your first step. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/AlexHoops to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to it. Let's get into the specifics of what OKC needs. If you've been keeping up with some of the buzz around OKC's offseason potential, the thing that keeps coming up is this idea of getting a backup center. A more traditional rim running kind of guy who can set hard screens, run to the rim, protect the paint, anchor the defense when Chet's not on the floor, and provide some lineup versatility that I think OKC is really missing. There was a pretty big lack of rebounding that OKC had to deal with during the playoffs. The Thunder had the 4th fewest rebounds per game in the regular season. They had the 5th lowest rebounding rate of any team in the regular season. And listen, I understand this philosophy that OKC has where they understand, okay, we're not going to get a ton of offensive rebounds. We understand we're not the best rebounding team in the world, but what we're going to do is we're going to offset it by getting turnovers. I understand that that's their approach. That's kind of how they try to mitigate the impact that a lack of rebounding has. And it's smart. Don't get me wrong. I think it can work to a certain extent, but there is a point where if the rebounding disadvantage is just too heavy, it doesn't matter how many turnovers you're generating if the team that you're going against is just absolutely killing you on the glass. And I think we saw that against the Dallas Mavericks. The issue to me isn't just that they're not the best rebounding team in the world or they don't get a ton of rebounds. The problem to me is that they didn't even have the personnel to try and counteract that in the first place. And another thing with a more traditional center that I think OKC is really missing is OKC doesn't have a ton of screening action going on in their offense that isn't just a guy like Isaiah Joe coming and setting a ghost screen for Shai and popping out to the top of the key to get a pass off of Shai's drive. That stuff is fine and it can work, but the bigger problem is the Thunder kind of struggle to create advantages because they don't have somebody capable of setting those hard screens that allows a guy like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to drive and create a direct advantage off the dribble basically immediately. And listen, I'm not saying that Chet Holmgren should become the full-time starting 4. I think you would still have Chet be that starting 5, but having this backup big would allow you to experiment a little bit with Chet running with more of a double big lineup. And I understand they kind of tried to do it with the other Jalen Williams a little bit throughout the season with, some levels of success. They've tried to do it in Summer League with a guy like 𝙖𝙗𝙤𝙪. And I actually liked a lot of the possibilities that it opened up, especially with stuff like double big pick and rolls, which is something you see Minnesota do all the time with Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. And I look at stuff like that and I think there's a lot of untapped potential there for OKC's offense, and they're leaving a lot on the table if they don't at least have the option to even try experimenting with that stuff. Also, if you get this more traditional backup big man, your defense is going to hold water a lot better when Chet's not on the floor, and you're going to be able to have more easy offense just by nature of having a guy who can set these hard screens and generate advantages for guys. So what about names? What guys should OKC be looking at to maybe potentially fill this void? One name that's been thrown out a lot that I do like is Nic Claxton. I think one of the issues right now is that Nic Claxton is definitely a starting big man. So if OKC were to get him, I don't know how that would go with him potentially coming off the bench. So I'm not sure if maybe that's the best option, but in theory, it's absolutely a guy that fills that hole and meets a lot of the criteria that people are mentioning when they say that they want this backup 5. Claxton brings a strong defensive focus that I think fits really well with what OKC tries to do. He's a very mobile big man, and he can also roam around in the paint and protect the rim pretty well. This was a defensive player of the year caliber player no more than 2 years ago, and I think he would do a great job within OKC's defensive scheme. And even though he can't shoot, I don't think that's going to be as big of a deal, especially with how much shooting he's going to be surrounded with at pretty much any given time, regardless of who's on the floor. He's going to be a free agent, and the Thunder have plenty of cap space to sign him to a lucrative long-term deal. I'm not sure exactly what that number could be. I would imagine it's going to be in the $20 to $25 million a year range. But if that's the direction that OKC wanted to go and swing on a big name like that, I think he would be a great fit. Now, a more budget option, even though I'm not sure that this team would be willing to trade this player, is Nick Richards. I know a lot of people probably didn't watch a ton of Hornets games this year, but if you did, Nick Richards probably stood out while you were watching them. He's a very, very solid rim running big man. Every now and then he flashes elements of a little bit of a push shot mid-range game that I like. He's also a very solid defender, and most importantly, he's a fantastic rebounder. He would bring a lot to the table in that department. I think he can fit well in pretty much any lineup that he's in, as long as he's not being asked to shoot threes or anything like that. He's a really solid screener, which is going to open up a ton for the Thunder. And Nick Richards is on a dirt cheap contract. He's making around $15 million over the course of the next 3 years, and that's a super solid budget option if that's the route OKC wants to go. And of course, if the Hornets were willing to part ways with him, I don't know if that would even be the case, but he's a name that I do like. He's a player that I've seen a lot of that I think would fit very, very well in this more traditional backup big man role. With all of this backup big man talk, there is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and it's that if you go out and get this backup big who's playing a more traditional role of setting screens, rolling to the basket, getting rebounds, protecting the paint, I think you have to go out and get a backup guard as well who can facilitate those lobs to that more traditional backup big man on the roll, who can operate as the pick and roll ball handler and make those passes at a high level. And I'm not saying there isn't anybody on OKC that can potentially do that, but getting somebody right now who you could pair with this theoretical backup big man, it would basically give you solid bench offense straight out of the box. And especially with OKC's spacing, just having this guard big duo who can come off your bench, go in there, run the pick and roll, and kick it out to shooters or generate stuff at the rim, that's going to do a ton for just overall continuity and the Thunder's ability to hold water regardless of who's on the floor. I don't have a ton of solid names in mind because this is a tricky one. Those players don't grow on trees. They're actually relatively difficult to come by. I think either Tyus Jones or Tre Jones would be fantastic. Again, I don't know if the Wizards would be willing to part ways with Tyus Jones. I don't know if the Spurs would be willing to part ways with Tre Jones, but if either of those two guys became available, I think they would be perfect fits for this. I want to close by talking a little bit about this idea of identity. I think it's really important for a team to have a strong identity, but the problem is a lot of teams get over-focused on this idea of identity and they end up losing out on flexibility. I don't think coaches should just give up on things right when they stop working. The stuff that got you to where you are in the first place is part of your identity, and giving up on it the second things get hard makes it really difficult to establish continuity. But in the postseason, flexibility reigns supreme. If you're not able to try new things and experiment against teams who are a particularly bad matchup for you, then you're just going to end up being dead in the water. The Thunder have data to learn from this previous postseason run. They should use everything that they saw as a lesson and address as many concerns as they possibly can this offseason. And it's not like they don't have the flexibility to do it. They've got $35 million in cap space potentially. They've got all the picks in the world to facilitate whatever trades they want to. So now is the time to strike while the iron's hot, instead of just sitting passively and waiting for things to develop and see what you have on your hands. I think at this point we know the Thunder have a potential long-term contender on their hands for years to come. So you need to go out and put the best team around your stars as you possibly can in order to maximize your chances of winning a championship. The Thunder too often just go out there and rely on Shai to bail them out whenever things get hard. They need to go out and provide some more options and possibilities to work with, because just because stuff was working last year doesn't mean it's going to continue to work and you need to be able to adapt and build on the fly. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know this was a little bit different than what I normally do. I'm going to be trying a lot of new stuff on the channel. I would like to try some new things and not everything be so, film breakdown and analytical. So if you guys enjoy this kind of stuff, let me know in the comments, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.